Welcome to Make It Plain from Make Plain Jesus Ministries, featuring Pastor James Bryan, where we take biblical truths in everyday situations and break them down to be as plain as possible. So, stay tuned and enjoy the broadcast.
Welcome to Make It Plain, another episode of this broadcast. And I am so excited to be able to just share some time with you and be able to talk about a subject that is pertinent to each and every one of us. And as I talk about this topic, I want you to listen in closely and understand these simple truths as I begin to just share some things with you and just give you some insight or food for thought. You see, today I want to talk about when stuff happens. And so I want you to know that back in episode 9 of our podcast, there is something where I talked about life happens. And so this is another step farther from that particular episode. You can go back to episode 9 at any time and listen to that. And this is just taking it farther, but in a different direction when stuff happens. Now, I'm going to joke with you for a minute because I know that a lot of you, when you have that phrase, when stuff happens, that oftentimes there's a different word put in there instead. But I'm just going to clean it all up for all of us, for those who are listening. And so that we can just understand that as we begin to address this topic from a biblical perspective, that we can understand how we have to deal with life. Now, as I'm being real with you and as I'm talking with you, I want you to understand that I'm well aware that there are challenges that exist in every avenue around us. There are challenges that no matter what part of the country or what part of the world you live, there are challenges that face you. And even at that point in time, every time a challenge comes to you, you have a choice on how you're going to deal with it and how you perceive it. So when stuff happens, the question becomes, how do you process that? How do you deal with that stuff? How do you let it impact you and your life, and even more importantly, where you are destined to go? The answer to that question is so important because it begins to define how far you actually get in life. Sadly, I know a lot of people that when stuff happens, they fold and they continue to repeat that cycle over and over and over again. Such that you're talking weeks, months, years later, they're still right there, almost like they're in quicksand, and slowly they're sinking. But instead of just reaching for the actual rope to pull them out, they're just letting themselves sink because they're looking at the quagmire that's around them, but not necessarily the way out. And so right now, when I ask you about when stuff happens, like what do you do about it, it's important that you think about it for just a minute. When I think about what's going on today, we have natural disasters that seem to be appearing and impacting lives more frequently than maybe 1 and 2 decades ago. It seems like there's one thing after another from a natural disaster perspective that just keeps coming and keeps coming and keeps coming. And so when that happens, a lot of people say, what gives? What is going on? Why is it that there seems to be so much happening? And then not only natural disasters, but there's so many man-made ones. And so man-made, I mean things that people created, but maybe they took corners and didn't build it right. That people relate to one another in ways that are not helpful. That people kind of dismiss others or begin to try to destroy the lives of others such that it has an impact on them and their families. So when we think about all these things, we also think about these particular role models that we think should exist, but we love it until we get to know them and we realize they're not perfect and we get dismayed. So you have all of this stuff that's happening, man-made, natural, and folks are wondering what's going on. Let's zoom in even closer, specifically to personal lives. Everybody at some point in their life goes through something. They have something that impacts them in ways that kind of slows them down for a minute while they try to regroup. That something may catch them off guard, and all of a sudden they're like, what just happened? And so it's those moments that we begin to say, well, wait a minute. We start questioning, God, why did you allow this to happen? God, I thought I was doing the right thing, and look what happened. And people are always saying, God, why? God, why? When storms roll through, or major disasters, earthquakes, fires, everything else that begins to happen, God, why? Why does stuff happen? And so one of the things that I can relate to you a little bit too is, and I've seen this a lot in my years in ministry and just interacting with people, and I've seen this happen far too many times. You see, the scenario goes something like this. There comes a point at someone's life, they decide all of a sudden that they realize that they need to get saved, give their life to Jesus, and begin to change their life so that they're walking in line with what Jesus is telling us to do. And they get so excited. I see these emotions that are flying they're at an emotional high, they're at a spiritual high, they're at a point of excitement. And many times tears are rolling down their eyes since they've made that commitment. They feel the weight lifted off and they're excited. And so then at that point, the service or the gathering ends and they walk out the door and they face life. Now, all of a sudden, the question becomes, well, what happens? And so in many cases, what has happened that I've seen is that people go out and all of a sudden things start to go crazy in their life. That their family begins to have issues. Their job begins to act crazy. Some people lose jobs. Some people lose other things. They begin to see relationships crumbling. They begin to see just all kinds of things in disarray from that point, from the time they committed and left church to every day beyond that. And then they come to this point of, why, God, why? I just gave my life to Christ. I just did all the things, and I committed to not doing all those things that I know were wrong, but I was going to change that. But now, all of a sudden, my life is falling apart. My spouse left. My dog is acting up. All these things are going on. Why, God? Why does stuff seems to happen right now at such an alarming rate in my life? And so then after those questions, they begin to go back in their mind and remember when things first started happening. And in their minds, it all had to do with their commitment to going to church. And you know what then happens? They call and say, I enjoyed it, but I'm not going to be in church anymore. In their minds, they're thinking, if I stop doing the right thing, then maybe all this stuff goes away. And that's all they want. And so many times I've seen that, which then stunts the growth of that person and their potential in their life. I've seen that countless times. Many of you know what I'm talking about. And so when life happens, or in this case, what we're talking about, when stuff happens, the question begins to come, how do you process it? I want to give you some thoughts on that, and I want you to understand this. So first of all, when you give your life to Christ, if you walk and say, look, I'm going to be a Christian, I'm committed to being a Christian, not in name only, but in actual life, you just have to know that everything isn't a bed of roses. It is the best decision that you could possibly ever make to follow Christ. But then you have to understand that all kinds of things happen, especially if you are really committed to doing the will of the Lord, because it's contrary to what everyone else is doing. And so you got to know that all of a sudden you're going to have storms. You got to know that life will throw all kinds of things at you, which really is the enemy trying to prevent you from going any farther, trying to discourage you. So when life happens, when relationships crumble, when employment goes away, when health seems to change, when people seem to disown you because of you wanting to live a right style, just know this: you aren't the first one who's ever gone through that. The Bible says there's nothing new under the sun. And so even if you go through and you have these moments of it seems like you have one loss after another, just understand in totality, you are so victorious, and it's an everlasting victory. Now, let me give you a couple of practical thoughts and things to think about. First of all, when you come to the point that it seems like it's one storm after another and you're ready to just throw in the towel and say, I quit, I want you to process it. I want you to remember the moment that you actually gave your life to Christ or committed. I wanted you to remember the moment that you decided to make a change for your life for good. Remember that experience. Remember how wonderful you felt. And then just keep pressing on and just press on remembering that experience, that it was worth it. Secondly, I want you to remember that countless people before you had to go through trials. And in this particular one, I'm not even just talking about Christians. I'm talking about just people in general that have had to go through challenges in their life. So others have gone through it, even though we often feel in the moments that we're the only ones to have gone through that. But I want to assure you that is not the case. It is not the case at all. And so you got to understand that you can make it through whatever the storm is, no matter how bad it is, no matter what you think the outcome is in the natural, you can make it through. And you focus on making it through. I often tell people, and if you've been around me for any period of time, you've heard me say this, is that a lot of times they use Psalm 23 as one that's just read at funerals. But the thing about Psalm 23, it talks about going through the valley of the shadow of death, not staying in it. It talks about victory coming through it. That's really the focus. And so no matter how dark the clouds are in your life, I want you to understand that that too will pass. And then on the other side is the light of grace. It is the fulfillment of your destiny. And that's when you begin to know that it will all work out for you. When you get a chance to go through all of these things, you begin to understand that God has worked everything out for your good. Now, additionally, I want you to understand something else. I want you to understand that even Paul himself, the Apostle Paul, went through these moments, and he said something really profound in Philippians in chapter 4. He began to talk about this one truth. And in it, he says, it's not even that one. Let me go up even higher. I know how to be abased, and I know how to abound. Everywhere and in all things I have learned both to be full and to be hungry, both to abound and to suffer need. Then he goes on to say something very powerful. He says, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. So that's the thing that we have to understand. No matter what you go through, if you're living, at some point you're going to go through challenges. If you're living, you're going to have those moments where it seems like there's no hope. But all of a sudden, when you realize you trust in the one who gives you strength, Christ who strengthens you, you can make it. When you see yourself going through to victory through him, you're going to make it. When you see that he is the source and the strength and greater than all, guess what? You're going to make it. And look at it from that perspective. The next thing I want to encourage you about is this. When you're going through trials, dark times, the last thing you want to do is to be isolated to yourself all the time. But, there's a but to this. Just make sure that who you surround yourself with are those that will encourage you and lift you up and not keep you down and just say, yeah, I agree, oh, woe is me. Because all that does is dampen you and keeps you at a hopeless state. But remember, Paul realized I can do all things through Christ. Remember, he's the one that was thrown in jail several times for things that were illegal that he didn't do. There were times that he was abused and beaten just because he was preaching the truth. But yet through all of that, he realized, he learned that he can do all things through Christ. So the other thing that we have to remember is when we're going through dark times, we can't try to process everything that's going on around us. You have to then look inward and begin to abide in the one who has the answer. And you begin to say, Lord, give me peace, the peace that surpasses all understanding. And then guess what? You begin to say, Lord, give me the wisdom on what needs to be done. Help me to know when to stop, do nothing, and let go. And help me to know when I have to put your plan to work. Let me know what I should be focused on and what I should not be focused on. Yes, stuff happens. But when it does, you've got an answer for all that stuff. And you just have to remember that, because in those times, things get better. In those times, decisions are made that makes everything work for you. Even when you go through these points when people shame you for something, you might have been in high regard, but all of a sudden, people changed, or maybe they didn't like the way you looked, or maybe they didn't like the way you said something, the way that you're shaped, or whatever the case may be. Just understand your growth, your success, your health, your prosperity, everything is not based on what everybody else thinks. It's based on the one who's called you, the one who is there for you. That's Jesus. When you learn to press into him more than just when there's a great song that you like, more than anything else, you begin to press in and just try God, that you taste and see. Then you begin to understand that what he's saying is life to you. It begins to inspire you. It gives you energy. It gives you joy. It gives you happiness. It gives you the ability to laugh at every storm cloud that comes your way. It gives you the understanding that is not as bad and dire as it may seem, because you're going to bring us out. The Lord will bring us out to a brighter day, right? And so when we see that, when we understand that, then that changes how we process our situation. For instance, have you ever come across somebody that has, it seems like the world falling down, but they don't seem to be bothered? They have a smile on their face. They seem to be content. And even talking to them encourages you, and you're thinking, shouldn't they be more upset than they are? But see, those people are the ones who are able to get to the point of getting the peace of God that surpasses all understanding, that gives them the assurance that they'll make it through. In other words, when you go through these times, you got to pull yourself and push yourself into his grace that he's giving us. Understand that you can stand on the grace that the Lord has provided. That means that favor, that grace that he's given you, such that you can succeed. You can climb any mountain, do anything that he's called you to do. And the other thing I want you to know from another point of view is this. It's never over until God says it's over. So all you have to keep doing is say, Lord, we still got time, right? Lord, we still got more things to do, right? And so even if it seems like it's taking forever to get to the point that you want to succeed or that you dreamed of, just understand that he's the one who can make it all work. So now, what I want to say to you is this. I want you really to go through life understanding that there are all kinds of things that are happening, all kinds of situations that are occurring. I want you to understand that people may or may not care for what you're saying, what you look like, where you come from, any of that. But yet, you are defined by the one who's created you, who's called you. You're defined by the one who says, take my yoke upon you. You're defined by him. When you press into that, you'll realize that everything will work out for your good. So on this day, I'm inviting you to just take that plunge. Trust in the Lord. That when the trials come, like Paul had to go through many, you too can go through it. It's not catching God by surprise. You too will understand that he'll bring you through. He's no respecter of persons. That even when you seem like you lost all physical possessions, he'll begin to restore you. Job lost everything. Job was what everybody thought it was because something Job did. But really it wasn't. It was the will of God to work in his life that way and to show his faithfulness. You may not always understand the whys, but you do understand the who, meaning who holds your hand. So when stuff happens, don't substitute it with another word that we don't want to discuss. But just know when stuff happens, understand your victory is nigh when you push into him. So I hope you grasped all that I said. I hope you are receiving what we're saying here, and then that you have a good opportunity in life, if not today, soon it will come, that you can put everything that we discuss to work. Have a good one till the next time.